Hello, hello, and thank you for joining Black Professionals in International Affairs today as a part of our leadership series. Um, my name is Alexandra Maloney, and I'm a BPIA board member, and I'm the moderator for today. So we're really excited for our guest speaker, Ms. Aleya Horn Kennedy. The thoughts and views of our guest speaker are their own, and if you haven't already, please follow Black Professionals in International Affairs on our social media and find more about membership on our website. Lastly, as we have the conversation, we encourage viewers and listeners to tune in on the thread with any comments or questions that they may have. So without further ado, I will introduce our guest speaker. Ms. Aleya Horn Kennedy is the Director of Programming and Training for Peace Corps Sierra Leone. She possesses over 15 years of program development, management, and monitoring and evaluation experience with a special emphasis in the fields of maternal, newborn, and child health, sexual and reproductive health, and youth development. Before becoming the Director of Programming and Training, she was a program specialist in the Office of Global Health and HIV with the Peace Corps. In this role, she served as the technical lead for programmatic and training support in the areas of youth health and well-being, water, sanitation and hygiene, and non-communicable diseases. Prior to coming to Peace Corps, she worked at the Association of Reproductive Health Professionals. During her tenure at ARHP, she managed a portfolio of continuing education and training programs for health professionals and patients focused on sexual and reproductive health topics. She holds a Master's of Public Policy with a concentration in education, social, and family policy from the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University. She's also a returned Peace Corps volunteer from Paraguay in 2002 to 2004, where she served as an urban youth development volunteer. So Ms. Aleya, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So I'd like to start off by asking, how is the current COVID-19 situation affecting the work that you do right now?
Yeah, it's affecting, impacting me a great deal. I'm actually not in Sierra Leone right now. I'm in Maryland. So we were evacuated from, my family and I returned in early April. Hopefully we will be able to go back back to Sierra Leone in June or July, well, probably closer to July. Unfortunately, Sierra Leone is kind of in their uptick of cases, and so we're not doing very well. I think other countries are in the process of getting their transmission under control, and I think unfortunately Sierra Leone is just beginning, and so we're seeing the spikes of cases and deaths, unfortunately, and so my hope is that I will return back to Sierra Leone over the summer, and sooner, but rather than later, hopefully.
Great, thank you.
One other thing I was going to say is it's greatly, and I mean, you may be aware that all of the Peace Corps volunteers globally were evacuated as well, and so it has really slowed down operations and work at most posts in the world, and so and for our staff, it is they are all virtually working virtually, and unfortunately there's challenges just because of being in a low resource setting. There's not as great bandwidth and other technologies that can be used to support telework. So, but we are in Paraguay, in Sierra Leone, we say small. So we try small. So we're doing what we can.
Thank you. So could you tell us more about your journey? So what got you to where you are today, academic, professional, life?
Yeah, no, it's great. It's funny. One of the things I thought it was the topic was very appropriate for my journey as well, because I really do. I think that I always tell the story that I at one point said to my mother, I want to go and live in another country, and I want to work with people, and I want to help build capacity and live in a village. And I asked my mom, what is that called? Like, what do you call that work? And my mom at that point said, well, if you did it in the United States, it's called VISTA. Back then, AmeriCorps was VISTA. And if you go overseas, it's the Peace Corps. And so that was at 14 years old that I had that conversation with my mother. And I'll just say that from that point on, my goal really was to get there, to get to working internationally. And I think at that point in that conversation, it really was getting to the Peace Corps. And so a lot of the things that I did up until that point were really just to get to the Peace Corps. And I think through that journey of trying to get to the Peace Corps, I realized an interest in doing more work in international studies and development work overseas. And so after that conversation, my mother likes to joke and say that I reached out to the Peace Corps, got my application, and started looking really at, what did I need to be able to be a viable candidate for the Peace Corps. And so one of the things that at that time, it was very important that you had extracurricular activities where you were doing, service work, or even in school, just doing service work, that you were a part of organizations that were focused on kind of international studies or cultural studies. There was one of the things I did at that time was also start taking language courses. And so I would say when I probably got to closer to like middle school and high school, I really started to focus on things like at that point I was doing Spanish. And even there was an opportunity to do study abroad and a kind of like a study abroad types of thing in high school. And I did that knowing in part, I think in part it was just because of the love and the interest in traveling, but then also wanting to figure out where I might want to serve in the Peace Corps, or what, and just I think getting a better understanding of just what was out there. At that point, I hadn't traveled, and many of the people in my family didn't travel internationally. And so I think even within my family, knowing kind of what was out there and what could be was very limited at that point. And so after high school, then I obviously went on to college, and I focused in really on sociology and international studies, because I knew that I wanted to do the Peace Corps, and I still was interested in development work. And so I also wanted to kind of make sure I was getting the skills that would make me like a pretty strong candidate. And so moving all the way forward, I then applied for the Peace Corps at the end of college. I had actually come home for probably about 8 months, and I had been applying since graduating. And then I got an offer to go to Paraguay. And I would say that it's interesting. I think that I always imagined either doing health work or youth development work, because everything that I had done up to that was either focused on health, or was focused kind of the sweet spot between health and like youth health and well-being. Really was a lot of the work that I had been focusing on up until that point. And so then I packed my 50 pounds or so and went off to Paraguay, and spent a lot of time working I worked in an Afro-Paraguayan community, and I was working on youth development. And it was a community that had a youth group and associations that really were working to promote their community, but I would say more broadly, Afro-Paraguayans, and we're looking at preserving culture. And so we did a lot of work around that. I think after the Peace Corps, I had a great and a wonderful experience. And when I came home, I think I still was in this thinking of, I kind of had this split between wanting to work in international work primarily, but then also domestic work. I think I've had this kind of tug and pull really throughout, I would say, most of my career. And when I came back, I was still, trying to figure out if I wanted to go on to grad school and what I wanted to do it in. And so I took a position with Planned Parenthood, working with migrant workers. And even through that work, I still had this interest and desire to continue working internationally. And I think in part the reason that I took that position was that it would allow me to keep up with my skills of working interculturally, working in my language, and then also in the focus the focus area of health, which has been, I would say, primarily what I've worked on throughout my career. And during that time, I realized that I needed to get a master's degree. And then it became a big discussion about what master's degree. And I've been, I think, that person who has, I'm one who looks at what job I want, and then I backtrace what did that person do to get it. And I really kind of started looking at all of the people that were working really in international development, and even in some kind of domestic programs around sexual and reproductive health, and what was their path. I think that I've always had an interest in policy, policy law, and then also, frankly, program implementation. And I feel like that's where I've landed now, is really in the program implementation side of international development. But I decided to go to Georgetown, and it actually was at Georgetown at the McCourt School. At the time I went, it was actually still Georgetown Public Policy Institute, and then they changed the name to the McCourt School. But in that course, in my coursework, one of the subjects that one of the classes that I took actually was on program evaluation and design. And I think that really was the first time where I thought about an international work where I was doing really program development. And so I think after that, then it somewhat changed. I think when I went to school, I went thinking I was going to do policy work. And even, frankly, right after, I was doing some domestic policy work. And I, interestingly enough, still had a pull towards international. And I think I even had more of a pull to working on more on program implementation and development. And so I at that point, right after grad school, the job that I had right after grad school, I left that job. I was actually working at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, a think tank in DC, and I moved from there and started working at the Association of Reproductive Health Professionals. And in that position, I started to take on more, even though it was a kind of international, a domestic organization that did international programs. So I was hired, and I took on a lot of their international programs. And I think I feel like that was where I realized that my next step was going to be truly international, because I really was enjoying and actually able to really apply experience that I had gotten from Peace Corps. And it was kind of the perfect mix of, things that I learned and gained in grad school, but then also things that I learned from Peace Corps. I was able to use the language that I had learned in Peace Corps. I would say I learned to speak Spanish in service, even though I had been studying it for most of my life. But I think that one of the things that had been a constant theme in looking for work is really believing in mission work and service work. And so everything that I really have focused on, and I somewhat have tried to find where like my skills and interests align with service and align with doing work. I think that I always imagined eventually coming back, and I was always a believer in public service. And so I also knew that there were only a few organizations, a few agencies with the feds that I was interested in working with. And at that time, I really, based on my experience with Peace Corps, really thought that would be a nice fit, and moved on to work for Peace Corps. And now I'm overseas in Sierra Leone working for Peace Corps. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
No, you've had so many great experiences, and I see people noting it in the chat too. So thank you so much for sharing that, and it's really inspiring, and helpful for individuals who may be interested in Peace Corps, understanding what these journeys look like and what they could look like, and sometimes that they're not necessarily as linear. I started day one knowing exactly what I want to do and just went straight to those things. But the fact that, different complementary things to one's journey can happen at different stages. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm curious to know more about your experience as a person of color in Peace Corps. So, what was that experience like for you and your colleagues overseas?
Yeah, so and it's interesting, coming back to this side, I'm experiencing similar, I'll say challenges and opportunities as well. I think that one of the things, and this is, I'd probably be preaching to the choir by saying that, you know, people of color aren't overly represented in the international development space, and is very true in Peace Corps. I think when I served, in Paraguay, there were two of us at that point that were, so I'm sorry, three of us at that point when I joined and arrived in Paraguay, and I would say it was one of those experiences, and maybe over my life, I've been, unfortunately, the one at the table or the one in the class or that. And so it wasn't something that was so foreign to me. I think maybe disheartening, but not foreign. And I think that there were, in some ways, in service, and like as a Peace Corps volunteer, there were things that just I could connect better with my community about. Given my experience, even growing up in Pennsylvania and that. And so in some ways within my community, I felt very much at home, and I felt very much connected, and I felt safe, if anything. I think sometimes outside of my community, I think that there were, Paraguay is a country that it's really close to Brazil, and they were very insular, and so they didn't have a lot of experience with people of color outside of, I would say maybe outside of Asian people, and so their experience with people of African descent really were the few pockets that were in Paraguay, but then greater Brazil. And so I would say to some extent there were stereotypes and things like that around it. I think that Peace Corps is back then did do a pretty good job of helping support volunteers. I would say that we're getting better. It definitely wasn't. I mean, I think that ultimately what happened, and I think back then we developed our own kind of support group, and our support around some of the challenges that we may have been experiencing. One of the, I think, unfortunately, one of the most common experiences was preference for non-people of color. And so even in, I think, some of the work, you know, I can remember a situation at one point where I was with a colleague of mine in service, and we were both speaking Spanish, and she had just come to country, and they would only speak to her and not to me. And so that's one of the things that I think that we encountered. And I would love to say that that doesn't happen in Sierra Leone as well, but there are plenty of times where I would say our volunteers experience that as well. And I think even to some extent, I do. I think that there is a Sierra Leonean, I mean, the Sierra Leone was colonized by the British, and so there is deference to white people. And so it comes up there as well. I think one of the things that is in my journey, I think in general in international development, that has been hard is that, as I started off by saying, that we are not widely represented in that space. And so that also means limitation in mentors. It means sometimes being the only, and trying to, you know, bring that perspective, but needing to speak for all people of color because you are the only one that is around that table. And so I think that, you know, that is, I think it expresses the importance of us getting around that table, but I think it also highlights like some of the challenge of that you encounter being, you know, coming into the international development and national affairs space, is that you might be the only, and you do have to deal with, I think you in some cases do have to deal with explaining why you're at the table, for instance. But I think even through that struggle, I think it's what makes it even more important to be at that table.
Great, thank you so much for answering that. My next question to you is, what do you like most about your work, and what do you find the most challenging things about the work that you do?
I would say the thing that I like the most about my work is actually in my current position, it's very dynamic. Um, Currently not, because we don't have volunteers and I'm here, but typically it's very dynamic. It's the only job that I've ever had where I'm managing a team of staff, so of Sierra Leoneans. And then I also am working with volunteers. And then I'm also working on program implementation. And so in Sierra Leone, we have two projects that we have in country: education and a health project. And so I am constantly working at like coaching and mentoring staff, supervising staff and the work of staff, coaching and mentoring volunteers in the work, and then also talking to ministry folks about our program and implementing our program within the country. And so it's the thing that I love the most is probably really just the dynamic nature of it. One of the things that I have many colleagues that are working in other parts, other agencies and within the federal government in Sierra Leone, and then with other NGOs. And I would say that I don't know if it's just true to Sierra Leone, but I think a lot of them would say the same thing, that their jobs and days are dynamic. And that there's a lot of different things that you can do in a day, some complementary, some not, but that it's almost like no day is exactly the same, and that's kind of nice. Another thing that I really, really like, and I think it's always been my motivation, is I do like working in kind of intercultural spaces, and I really one of my favorite things is just around building up the capacity of our staff. And I think that as a person of color, it's even more meaningful to me, because I feel like a lot of our staff are used to only believing that someone that does not look like them can do this. And they're sometimes turning to others where they have all of the power right there in themselves. And so I think as a person of color, it's been even more important for me to show up, but while different, some of the trauma and difficulties that they've experienced, but that, even with me, looking at me, and seeing what I've been able to accomplish, I feel like just showing up in that way, I give them a voice, and the ability to believe that, you can do what you put your mind to as well. And so, but I think it's one of those things where I would say that it is a blessing and a burden, because I think some of the hardest parts of working in Sierra Leone and maybe even working in the international development space is that the hardest thing about working in, and maybe just in development in low resource settings, is the fact that it's developing and low resource. And so there are a lot of mentalities and just kind of the way things have gone, the way people are used to things happening. And I would say it's the blessing and the curses, because it also is what makes the job very interesting. But it also is, I think if you go into working in international development and you think that something is going to happen in the time frame that you allotted, you're usually wrong. It usually takes a lot longer. And I don't actually know why we think it's going to be less. And I mean, in anything that like you're working in a where you have to come in and understand the cultural dynamics, understand history and all of that, I don't know why we would think it would take less time, but I think a lot of development workers go in very much, okay, we have a 5-month project and we're going to do these things, and not realizing that it's been 40, 100 years of building, and so or just of just different things, and it's going to take longer. And so I think that not to say that I think it's a challenge in maybe yourself, not necessarily, I mean, it's a challenge in just operating in that space.
Great, thank you for answering that. My next question is, in regards to, and I see we have some here in the chat, so I will be sure to include some of those questions, bring those questions in after I ask this one. So where do you see, with this current COVID-19 situation and the pandemic at hand, where do you see the future of Peace Corps in terms of fulfilling, you know, the work that so many volunteers actually do? So do you see it, you know, sending maybe less volunteers, or to, you know, focusing on, you know, sending volunteers to that aren't considered hot zones? Like, where do you see, or have they given you all any insight on what to look for in the long term with Peace Corps?
No, I mean, I would say, I mean, I think one of the things that Peace Corps has been very good at is being able to be flexible enough to reflect the change. And so I know that, you know, Peace Corps right now is in the process of thinking about that. I mean, it's probably the first time, I mean, well, I would say the first time in the history of Peace Corps that all of our volunteers have been evacuated. So they're kind of I think in that space right now of thinking about what does this mean, and are reaching out to post to kind of to see. I think that, you know, yes, I feel like if for no other reason than you know, there's the pandemic, even until a vaccine is going to be something that we are dealing with. And so I think at this point, you know, Peace Corps and Peace Corps Post are looking at, you know, one, what is work that volunteers can do when they come back around it. I mean, I know that when Sierra Leone similarly went through Ebola. And one of the things that came out of that is that when Peace Corps came back, after volunteers were evacuated for Ebola and Peace Corps came back, they really were working on, you know, still working on kind of the Ebola like effort and like and doing behavior change communication around washing hands and signs and symptoms and things like that. And so I imagine that will evolve and continue. And I think that, you know, one of the things that in my time with Peace Corps as a volunteer and then throughout working is that they are very they react to the situations and are adaptable. And I think that that's one of the things that they're looking at right now, to see, you know, how best, one, to bring volunteers back, but then also how best to engage countries in this work. And in some cases, I mean, it's even staff might end up doing work and being seconded to like efforts that are going on. Like under Ebola, some of our staff even were doing being translators or for like CDC or other entities that were working, or they were going out and they were doing trainings with communities. And so I imagine that same type of thing will come up. I mean, one of the things I think that Peace Corps has always been pretty strong on is language. And so, I mean, we oftentimes people will reach out to us to be translators in situations like this. And so I think that there are a lot of possibilities, and that, you know, one of the things that our director has committed to is that Peace Corps volunteers will be back in the field. And so I think it is just a matter of watching as a situation evolves to determine when that will be. And at this point, I am watching it as well because I don't have any up-to-date information either. But I definitely think there's a role for Peace Corps in this, and in the days, in the weeks, and the months coming, it will be announced more what we'll be doing.
Thank you for sharing, because I know that's a question that's on everybody's mind, is what's next. And, you know, across the industries, but especially in the international affairs realm, where things are, you know, have even more factors that go into, you know, the continuation of the work that folks are doing. So we have 2 questions so far that I'm seeing here in the chat. The first one I see is the person says, I'm currently up for a DPT position at Peace Corps.
Oh, wow.
What Aleya does. How long did it take to get boarded once she made the cert, I'm assuming certification, and was referred?
Oh, great. Oh, great. Well, congratulations. So, well, and I guess, I mean, well, maybe a follow-up question to your question. So, let's see, I applied, and once I got the interview, so I would say I applied when I worked so I was working at Peace Corps prior to applying, so I applied, and then I would say I had the interview, maybe it was about 3 or 4 weeks after I applied, I think it was probably about that, I got a call for an interview. And then after that, so after that interview, then I was given an offer, and then I had to wait, let's see, because you go through medical and security clearance, and unfortunately, I think given the COVID, it will slow it down. Interestingly enough, when I applied, I think one thing my process, we were going through the furlough, so it was slowed down as well. And so I would say, I mean, it's usually anywhere from, you know, I'll say 3 months to 6 months before you're cleared. And then it is, you do a training, and we do a kind of an onboarding training, and then you will go to post. And so I think it could be anywhere, I'd say like 6 to 7 months is on the low end maybe, and on the high, on the maybe longer end, a year. I'd say the year is abnormal. And I guess my experience was as an internal candidate. So I still think it's safe to say between like 7 to 8 months until you're overseas.
Great, thank you for answering that, Daj. I hope that answers your question. Up next, we have a Miss Ebony Taylor, who asked, Ms. Kennedy, what are some things you think someone should consider before applying to the Peace Corps? I have been considering it for a while, but there never seems to be a good time.
Okay, 1 second, sorry, you were just breaking up just a little bit. I was gonna, can you just restate the question?
Sure. Ms. Kennedy, what are some things you think someone should consider before applying to Peace Corps? I've been considering it for a while, but things just don't seem to be to line up in terms of it being good timing.
Yeah, I guess I would, I feel like one of my mottos in that has become in life is there's never good timing. There's the timing that is almost, I mean, it's not as bad. So I would say, I guess the thing is, I mean, I think there's no surprise that a lot of Peace Corps volunteers serve right after college. And the reason being that you have less on your plate at that point. So you're usually in, I mean, a lot of times people will use Peace Corps even just to get the more experience in the international space, to get a language. And so they're not really maybe necessarily ready to go into grad school. And so they're doing it, they're using Peace Corps as a way of getting more professional experience as well as language and then kind of overseas experience. That being said, I think that there's a fair amount of people that, and unfortunately we no longer have the Peace Corps Masters International Program, which was a great opportunity for people that were in that kind of master's space or wanting to do their master's. And so we no longer have that. But there is a fair amount of, I think a good time is also in between, you know, even like after you get a master's, right after the master's, because I think that your Peace Corps experience then is even more focused, because you know you have a master's in a certain area and like you're focusing on the experience. That being said, I think a lot of things, I know for me, I finished grad school unfortunately with a second mortgage, and so for me going right after grad school wouldn't have been an option, just like financially wouldn't have been an option, because even if I could have deferred, I would have eventually had to pay it back. And so I chose to start working to some extent. But I do think that, you know, you can see
Aleya, I'm not sure if you can hear me okay. Okay.
A way of getting really tangible experience internationally. So if you're not working in that international space already, at least 2 years of that through Peace Corps. Peace Corps, you can.
All right, so I think that,
Did I lose you?
hi, we can hear you now.
Did you lose
Yeah,
me?
yeah, we can hear you okay now. Can you hear me, Aleya? Excuse us, everybody, for the technical difficulties here as we work on getting.
You can. Okay, so sorry.
Yep.
I think you're a little bit breaking. Hear you fine.
So I can hear you better now. Yes. Are you able to hear me okay?
Sorry. Okay, I'm back again.
Okay. Yep, I can see you and it seems clear and I can hear you okay.
Okay. Hopefully, I think if it's on my end, I may switch locations, but I think that we're good now.
Okay.
So I don't know if you heard anything that I said.
Yeah, we missed maybe the last like 30 seconds of what you were saying. If you also think it'll make it easier if you want to mute the video, because I know sometimes that can affect you can also do that too.
Okay, we'll do.
Okay.
So I don't know where I left off, but I was just gonna. I think that what I was really just wanting to say is that you can use Peace Corps as a way of getting more experience. And there's also different types. So there's Peace Corps service, but there's also Peace Corps response. And so there's like the 2-year, or you can, if you already have, you have masters and you have other like your specialized skills, you can also look at doing Peace Corps response. And the one thing I would say about Peace Corps response, especially if you're already working in a career, is that Peace Corps response for the most part is looking for people who have specialized skills to go and do a specific job. And the way that it's a little different than Peace Corps is that you may be placed with an organization that is interested in doing strategic planning or strategic work around social, for instance, and so the Ministry of Health, social welfare. And so Peace Corps response allows you to take kind of like these higher level positions, I would say, and more specialized experience. And so like it's a perfect example of a Peace Corps response position is that maybe working at a teaching college to train teachers on how to do different things. We used to have programs around kind of water sanitation and hygiene where engineers would go and work with water commissions within the ministry. And so in some ways, like you could do, and it's also a shorter term thing. So you could do less, it could be a year or 6 months. So it's even a shorter time commitment as well.
Great, thank you very much for that. And then there are 2 more questions here that I'm going to ask, and then I'll conclude with a concluding question that I have. Dodge says, just a comment, I know your country director, Penny, she's a good friend with my aunt in Philadelphia, where I'm from.
Oh, wow.
So maybe you guys can connect offline after the conversation, since there seems to be a lot of common here. I see the next question is from Allison Johnson, who's a BPIA board member. Hello, Aleya. Could you speak to the current intersection today of USAID, the U.S. Department of State with Peace Corps? Is there an overarching approach across these different agencies and entities that kind of cross similar paths? And she says, in particular, soft power, smart power, that approach versus the current administration, which has a more hard power approach. Has that affected the work that you all do?
That's a great question. It's funny, I was just on another webinar and we were talking about how there was a similar question around like how does the work that you do change based on administration? And one thing I will say about Peace Corps, and I could talk about it more from like my time with Peace Corps, is that it hasn't had a, maybe for Peace Corps at least, while obviously we follow the mandates that are put out there, it really hasn't affected our day-to-day operations. I think that, you know, and maybe more so even when in country, that we are still able to do our projects in the way that we've done them, and with improvements, of course, but the way that we've done, like Peace Corps' approach to development hasn't changed given even the administration. And I would say on that kind of soft power, hard approach. And so we always talk about the Peace Corps approach to development is really participatory, it's engaging the community, and really it's driven by the community. And so I would say that we really have from our approach standpoint, really working from kind of community-led work. And so I would say that like it doesn't impact the work that we've been able to do of budget and moves, and of course that impacts our ability to do some of the work in the way that we've done it. I don't think that it's a change our approach, but there may be initiatives that we've had in the past that we no longer have funding for. And so the one thing that I'll say about just Peace Corps Post though, is that, you know, they will pick up the work. I mean, it's based on what's needed in the country. And so they will find ways to continue the work that's needed for the country. And so I'm thankful. I think that it's one of the reasons that I really love working for Peace Corps, is that we really can still do the work that is needed within our countries. That being said, of course, I mean, you know, I think with every administration, there are changing of priorities. One of the things that, I don't want to say that it's a changing of a priority, but there's at least a stance around getting countries to arrive at a resiliency, a level of resiliency. I think that every administration has talked about this, because I think ultimately we're trying to work ourselves out of jobs. Ultimately, we want to get to, at least for Peace Corps, we want to get to a point where we're not needed to be in the country. And so I think Peace Corps' approach has always been about resiliency and self-reliance. And so I think that the current administration is definitely talking about it, and they're maybe taking the approach of having more private partnerships to help with that. Whereas, you know, other administrations may have been, I mean, equally talking about private partnerships, but we're also recognizing the stance at which countries really were on that kind of journey to self-reliance. And so I think that, you know, in development, I mean, ultimately we are, like, our job is to bring people up. And so, and with the hopes, I want to believe, with the hopes that you will no longer be needed to lead that drive. But definitely, I think that with our current administration, there is a bit of more looking at, you know, private partnerships more. And I don't necessarily, I guess, fundamentally disagree with that, because I do think that that is one thing that we need to bring to the table. But I always have loved the Peace Corps approach in helping it be community led. And so I'm glad that we're able to still do that. And then also looking at how can we strengthen other partnerships? How can we help, at least from my level, not as a volunteer, but from my level, like working with the Ministry of Health and working with other NGOs to look at how we can help I keep saying Paraguay, Sierra Leone, evolve and get to where they, like, get to their level, whatever their level of self-reliance is. But I think that, you know, it's interesting, we partner a great deal. I mean, Peace Corps falls under state, even though we're separate. We're kind of, it's this connection, but this disconnection. So we're not under, like, we are under mission, but not under state. And we work a lot with state and frankly, USAID. And in country, I work a lot with around malaria and other health topics that are associated with USAID. So we are allies and partners and are pushing the same, like, we are one mission and we are pushing the same work. And so I would say that we continue to be able to do our jobs, and I think they do as well. And as is, I mean, I think it's just evidenced by, you know, some of the biggest issues around health, at least USAID is able to continue to work around malaria, around and currently COVID. And so I think that, yes, of course, every administration has something that they are pushing. There are initiatives that they're pushing and their ways of doing it. And I would say, in my experience, and it's been like working with Peace Corps for 5 years, a little bit over 5 years now. It has not made us move away from our core mission and our core work. I hope that answered the question. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's a very conclusive response there. So I appreciate that. The last question I'm going to ask from the audience says, what are your plans post Peace Corps, since they have limited term appointments?
Yes. Yeah. It's again, blessings and curses. Because you have to leave at some point. I think that, so like I started off by saying that I really am on the interest of the program implementation side. And so I will likely join my colleagues at USAID or state or some NGO probably, because my family, we want to continue doing living overseas and working, and so I likely will see what is in that space. I actually have enjoyed really working with the federal government. And so I think that, you know, while I'm open to working for other governments as well as other NGOs, I think one thing that I didn't really share that I'll just say is that there are some things about that are just easier, frankly, I think, in working with the federal government as far as like benefits and things like that. And just kind of, it in some ways it's good that you don't it's just a standard package and you don't have to negotiate it. Sometimes it's bad because you want to be able to negotiate, but you have an idea of what you're getting into. And it is, I think at this point it is, I always think if I was younger and I was doing it and I didn't have a family, then I would just go and work anywhere with anyone and not worry. But unfortunately or fortunately, I have both of those things in place, a family and others that I need to think about it. And so working with the federal government and doing it that way, and it's one thing that's very appealing to me. I may look at foreign service, being a foreign service officer with USAID. I think is kind of one of the things I'm looking at right now as a possibility. But I really am interested in the kind of the program implementation side of things, and so I'd like to continue there.
Great, thank you for that. Well, I look forward to seeing you at USAID in the future. So my last question to you, and feel free to put any concluding thoughts on this question, but if you could speak to your younger self, is there anything that you know now that you wish you knew when you first started this career path?
Yeah, I think that, like, it's funny, for my younger self, I would have said, you know, keep on the path, like keep like on, you know, on the international development path, get as much experience as you can in it. One thing that I just, because I've gone back and forth a little bit between domestic and international, it was a challenge coming back into international. And I would say that, like, that's the one thing. It's not a regret, because I think that in all of the experience that I've gained, it's actually, frankly, made me better at my job, and it's giving me a lot of the skills that I didn't have, like, right after Peace Corps, right after college, and even, frankly, right after grad school. And so, but I think that one of the things that I've learned is just, I mean, like anything, it really is about in international development, it is connection, and it is, I have a lot of friends who have been working in that space for a while now, and I think that's a blessing for me, because they're my connection to it. But a lot of those people started building those connections and building that network, and taking work internationally a lot like earlier on. And so I think that while it's definitely possible, I think I'm evidence that it is possible to go between international and domestic work. It's just an added challenge that you have to just weigh, and making sure that you're connected to both spaces in some way, I think is what I would say to my younger self: find a way that you can be connected in both spaces as well. But I think that a concluding thought is that, like, I mean, one of the things that I feel like I've been fortunate is, like, that every opportunity I've taken, I've always had this, someone said it best, is that you should take a job that you're 75% prepared for, and knowing that, you know, there'll be 25% that you'll learn and grow. And I feel like every job I've taken, I've gotten something out of it. Like, I've learned something, and it's leveraged me for the next position. And I always go into a job thinking about, what are the things in this job I want to work on. So, you know, is it leadership? Is it leadership? Is it language? Is it, you know, I didn't know a lot about this subject area. One of the things I did when I was, my first job at Peace Corps actually was working in monitoring and evaluation. And so working at nonprofits, I had been doing that work, but I never had a job where that was my job. And so I took it with the idea that I really wanted to get concrete skills in looking at MME and in an agency, from an agency standpoint. And so I think that I've been fortunate that I've been able to find jobs where I could have that 75-25, you know, split. And I think that every job I've taken, it's always been with the idea of what skills, you know, can I get out of it. I've also been fortunate. I am been very fortunate to have the ability to find jobs that I'm passionate about, and that also fulfill me, my belief in service. I wonder if it's also not that I also look for jobs where I can do service and it's mission-driven work, and so maybe it's more that I'm only looking at jobs where I can do that. But I've been very fortunate to be able to really line up my belief in service and mission work with the work that I've been able to do. And so I think that, like, I've been fortunate, yeah, to have those opportunities.
Thank you so much, Ms. Aleya, for sharing your experiences and insights with us. What's the best way for folks to, you know, get in contact with you? LinkedIn? Yeah,
LinkedIn, I think is great. That's perfect. I'm happy. I mean, I think that I think you may even have my personal email. I'm happy for people to reach out to me that, or professionally. I can share that. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. So feel free, definitely, to reach out.
All righty. Well, thank you so much for speaking to us today. And thank you for everyone who joined in on this conversation today. So again, please continue to follow Black Professionals in International Affairs on our website and on our social media. We'll look out for future programs.
Thank you.
All righty. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.